Hey everybody, welcome to the Park Score podcast, the absolute best podcast on the whole interwebs. I'm here with my absolute favorite guest, Mr. George Boreas. He's an independent scholar, Rene Girard, savant. George, you want to say hello to the audience?
Hello everyone, glad to be back on Parks' podcast. We had some great conversation before. Let's have another one.
Yeah, so our goal for this episode, I think on our last two episodes have been one of the more popular podcasts that I've done. They typically 3x whatever the view count on my other ones are. So you're very well liked by the audience.
It's very encouraging to hear that. Appreciate it.
Heck yeah. So we got a good topic lined out for tonight's episode, actually. So we're supposed to be talking about Rene Girard's mimetic desire as it relates to St. Paul's conception of the flesh.
Yeah, it's a big topic. It's a serious topic. And I wrote one of my recent posts on Substack, boreassubstack.com, was about that. I don't know how I stumbled on it, but I think about Rene Girard's theories all the time. A lot of them are related to Christianity, of course, and this one I had this kind of connection. That's might appear. It's not such a long shot of a connection between St. Paul's the flesh and Rene Girard's desires, but I think it's worth mapping out because it really helps the conversation, I think, both ways, to maybe Christians who don't really understand Girard's idea of desire so well, and also Girardians and in general people who read the epistles of St. Paul and think, why is this guy so against the flesh and what does that even mean? I think that's the basically motivation here.
Yeah, for sure.
Topic.
And so could you give us a kind of a brief introduction for people who maybe don't know about Rene Girard or mimetic theory? Could you give us a brief introduction into that and then kind of a brief introduction to the concept of the flesh?
Yeah. Okay. Try to keep it to what's going to be relevant. These are big topics. But Rene Girard, mimetic theory, right, is called mimetic theory because the basic premise is that human desires are imitated. We imitate our desires from one another. But that sounds simplistic. It's more than that. What Girard really distinguishes when it comes to human desires is the fact that they're not fixed or they're not, let's say, animalistic. So animals have instincts, not desires or urges. Animals have the basic urges for food, for reproduction, maybe the fight or flight instincts and so on. These are fixed. They're not subject to fashions, right? They cannot be changed. And once they're satisfied, they truly are satisfied. Once an animal drinks water, they're not thirsty anymore. Once they eat, they're sated, and that's the end of it. And same goes for humans as well. But desire goes way above and beyond that. Desires, it gets confusing because desires can be built, so to speak, on these basic instincts. For example, sexual instinct, right? The most talked about human desire is probably sexual desire. And a lot of people online, your pickup artists, your people who are supposed to be big theorists on the sexual desire, continue to model it as basically animal instinct. And this is where Girard would say that's a big mistake. We have the urge to reproduce, but that's become so small. We built these towers of desire, these resplendent structures of desire that drive us into obsession and so on and so forth. So this is what we mean when we say that desires are imitated. They're influenced by what we see. We can be charmed or seduced into desiring something and so on and so forth. Is that really true with animals? Do they get seduced? Think about it. So and then these desires, which are very powerful, they create all sorts of obsessions and so on. And the whole culture, the whole human culture, or a lot of human culture, is based around controlling these desires, managing them, channeling them, making sure they're not destructive, and so on. So I probably don't need to describe Paul's, the biblical idea of the flesh. But my main thesis here is that when St. Paul or the Bible says the flesh, again, they don't just mean basic animal urges, but they mean the equivalent of what Girard means when he says that, yes, there's these urges, but it's really the flesh is these desires that drive you into destructive behaviors and obsessions and idol worship. In sexual desire, we say people have a fetish, but fetish also means, in a certain anthropological sense, it means like some kind of idol or deity. You might read somewhere saying, oh, it's a indigenous fetish, probably not politically correct anymore, but you're probably aware that the word fetish might mean sexual fetish, but it also might mean a religious fetish, like a little figurine or an idol. So I think that's all connected, and that's what we're on about here.
Absolutely. And this concept of the flesh, it seems like it's always, not always, but it's usually defined in contradistinction to the things of the spirit, right? And so the flesh, at least to my understanding, it's not always necessarily something that is purely material, because we're not Gnostics. We don't believe that the material world is inherently bad or that the body is inherently bad, but the flesh is sort of, I guess you could say, a classification of desires that place us on the same level as beasts, right? Would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah. That's a very good question, really, because then the question becomes really why do they call it the flesh? If it's just desire. Girard would say that desire is what makes us lower than the beasts or higher than the angels. But so why is it called the flesh? Why does St. Paul call it the flesh? Why does the Bible call it the flesh? We see the flesh in Genesis. I have a quote here right before the flood. God says, men are just flesh. I will not let my spirit to dwell in them for too long. I'm going to limit their lifespan to 120 years. So this idea of the flesh as distinct from spirit goes throughout all of the Bible. And again, it's a bit of a mystery, right? Why do they use that word? And again, going back to Girard, we can say that these pursuits of the flesh are distinct from spirit in a sense that they happen when human beings abandon the spirit, or let's say abandon the belief in God or transcendence. So you kind of start believing, what's in front of me, what's here in the flesh is all there is. So all the greatest pleasures, the best pleasure, the greatest transcendence I can achieve is I can achieve through these pursuits. They're not animal instincts, they're human desires, but you're trying to achieve your ultimate transcendence through sexuality, through pursuit of wealth, and you abandon the invisible world. Ironically, yes, these kind of pursuits can get you really into really dark sadomasochistic places where you're worshiping your obsessions. Where you're worshiping your obsessions and so on. But they're based on the fact that you're kind of abandoning belief in God, really. Mm-hmm. Let me find it here, if I can do really quick. The flesh. So, Moses, right? So even the book of Moses seems to use the word flesh, Hebrew basar, to signify wicked passions. Early in the book of Genesis, before the flood, God looks upon humankind and laments, laments the fact that they are flesh. We read, "Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. And also, and God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them." So my question is, you can ask the question, why would God lament the flesh in its literal sense when he's the one who created the flesh and saw that it was good, right, earlier on. But now God's regretting the flesh. Well, if you interpret flesh as this willful turning to destructive passions, then that sort of makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. So I think from the very early on, flesh does just mean, embodied spirit, embodied life, and it doesn't just mean animal urges, but it means something much more than that.
Absolutely. And so it seems, and it has here in your notes that the flesh can be much more than just animal urges. A lot of times it does sort of reflect the sort of metaphysical desire we see detailed in Girard, where it's connected to intellectual pursuits, idolatry, and sorcery, and all sorts of other things. So, so why, for you, why are these things seen as destructive, or why is things like idolatry or sorcery identified as dangerous to mankind?
So this would, again, there's a sort of like traditional religious way of explaining that. Girard always offers your rationalized kind of anthropological view, and Girard's view would argue that desire ultimately ends up sadomasochistic, right? And you can think of idolatry and sorcery as an extreme sort of examples of that. So how does it work, right? A man pursues some earthly desire. Let's say it's sexual desire, so you're chasing a person, right? What happens is sort of desire is always after a higher being. And if desire is very easily satisfied, that's not the end of the story, right? If you have burning sexual desire and you win too quickly, too easily, now if you're an animal and that's just instinct, the story ends there, right? You've satisfied your biological prerogative, you're done. That's why animals have just like your rutting seasons in October, September, or whatever, and they're done, right? But with desire, it's not like that, right? If desire is easily satisfied, it actually concludes that the object they were pursuing was not that pearl of great value they thought it was. So the conclusion isn't, oh, I'm done, I'm satisfied now. The conclusion is, this was too easy. This has not given me transcendence. I'm just still an ordinary human being. And then you move on to a higher challenge, right? A romantic way to put it is like you want to challenge yourself. So you're going to repeat that process, whether it's sexual or whether it's chasing money or it's gambling or something like that. What we see is when people never let go of their desires, they end up seeking out their own failure because they never achieve, they never grasp that pot at the end of the rainbow. It doesn't exist. So they're always chasing it. But what that ends up producing is that it ends up producing repeated disappointment, right? And we can observe that people who abandon themselves to passions appear not to be some kind of utility maximizing hedonists, joy seekers, but they appear to be torturing themselves, sadomasochists, right? So, and not only that, but how do we tie this with sort of religion and idolatry, which is what St. Paul does. He calls covetousness idolatry. So what does idolatry have to do with sadomasochism? Well, you see, Girard would say that you're pursuing this, again, pearl of great value, and as it continually rejects you, as you the harder you try, you try harder and harder, you give it your best, and you find that this mysterious thing always eludes you. You start thereby associating with it supernatural powers or great powers. This thing that draws you so powerfully, but also has the power to shatter, to throw you into the dust, to beat you up, and to make you feel miserable, that to you becomes transcendent. That to you becomes the sacred, right? So again, think of it, sexuality, right? People, pickup artists, I don't want to bash on them too much, right? But, they end up worshiping women, let's say, even though they hate them.
Yeah.
So really, the woman becomes this fetish, this idol, right? And we can say the same thing for money. So, and literally, maybe in some more innocent ancient times or archaic times, people probably, through ritual and through these cultural means, ended up literally creating idols out of these frustrated passions.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, exactly. And so for you, do you feel like there is so obviously when it comes to idols, I think one thing that we see across ancient human cultures and also just it seems Girard is making this point as well, at least implicitly, it's that originally the idol starts out as something that's sort of concrete or founded in, well, it's always a created thing which is being idolized and which is being sort of looked at as like the final end, so whereas a lot of like animistic religions and cultures would like ascribe like a deified status to things like the water or the rocks or the trees or whatever. It's funny how as cultures get more developed, they begin to have more abstract notions of God, and also too with desire. What we see with metaphysical desire is it seems like it becomes more and more of something abstract. So someone who is first starting out, like they might have some sexual desire that they pursue, right? They want this woman or they want this certain sexual experience, but then once they attain it, their metaphysical desire is always outpacing them, and it becomes more and more abstract over time. Like this idol that they pursue is becoming more and more abstract over time, and Girard seems to make the point that like desire is always sort of learning from, almost like learning from itself, where as soon as you attain something, desire figures out how to elude you even more. It learns how to become more elusive as you get closer and closer to it. But do you see something like this sort of in the flesh? I know that point was kind of rambling a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. Do you see there any sort of connection between?
Yeah. So
yeah, go ahead.
You're right about it. So Girard writes that desire is always one step ahead of the person, and it understands itself better than any other person. That's why Girard often talks about desire as though it was its own agent, right? Because it kind of takes possession of us. He says somewhere that you're good to use the word metaphysical desire. I think Girard uses that word, borrows it from French novelists like Stendhal, who also talk about, I think, mental desire or something like that. Somewhere in there, Girard says that metaphysical desire begins when all pleasure ends. So, as an interesting side point, Girard would probably say that people who get the most sort of true pleasure or joy out of desire, out of fulfilling their desire, are the ones who don't pursue it so much, or are the ones who are kind of innocent. Because when you don't obsess, right, then you become more like a child or even an animal. Then you can actually just enjoy what you receive, right? But the metaphysical desire is not able to appreciate that earthly, that embodied joy, and it's always looking for that transcendence, the metaphysical higher being. And because that metaphysical higher being is a mirage, it can never achieve it. So so once people become obsessed, when they get this kind of inflamed desire, again, it's kind of the joy disappears. You might say it becomes just about status, right? Like for people who just chase money, right? They don't really enjoy their money. They work whatever around the clock, and they're just accumulating more and more.
Mm-hmm.
But I can talk a little bit more about. Okay, go ahead.
So this is might be a completely.
Don't drop it. Yeah.
This might be a totally separate point, but it's funny what you said. So like there's this hustler bro that everybody knows. His name's Alex Hormozy. He's like one of these business advice guru guys, and it's funny. He talks about, so he's like pretty outspoken about being like an atheist, materialist. He's like, his whole brand is that he's just like, oh yeah, you're just going to die one day, and none of it really matters, so you might as well just, he's all about like self-development and all this stuff. And it's so funny because he has a podcast called The Game, and he always talks about how money is really just a game. He's like, the game is just like essentially how much money you can stack, or how wealthy you can become, or whatever. And it's funny because it seems to be this like highest value for him, but at the same time he sort of almost like positions himself in this place where he's kind of trivializing it, and he's just like, oh, it's just a game, but it's like kind of what he's centering his entire being and existence around. So it's I don't know, that something you had said kind of for some reason made me think about that, but I know that's,
I think I think you see that everywhere. The game, money is a game, or pickup artistry is a game. I think there's a need. Okay, so you're what could be
to me,
behind
it speaks to like a nihilism.
Okay, I think that's it. I think it's also part of it's definitely nihilistic, but there's also this bit of a strategy there, because in a seduction strategy, whether you're chasing women or money, you have to present an aura of self-mastery, right? You can't be pathetic. You can't just say like, I love this thing so much, I want it more than anything in life. Because once you do that, it's a total turnoff, right? If you think about it. So it is necessary. So these people they're all about the money, but they can't admit it. So then calling it a game is kind of saying like, look, I'm a master of myself, even though you're not, right? Because you're obsessed with it, but it's just something you have to say.
For sure. Absolutely. So for you, do you see a development here with Paul's sort of presentation of the flesh? Because the New Testament is like kind of like the new is prefigured in the old. Do you see that? Do you see the flesh sort of being represented in the same way? Like we sort of have a prefigurement of it, or an allusion to what will finally be revealed in Paul's presentation of it?
Yeah. So I have it here. It's interesting again because the flesh in the Old Testament, I already mentioned with Moses, right, or the books of Exodus. It doesn't strike you if you just read it, but I think if you understand St. Paul and if you connect the dots, this definition of the flesh becomes much more nuanced. St. Paul was the Pharisee, right? He was an expert in Mosaic law, and to him, circumcision was this symbolic or this sign of renouncing the flesh, renouncing these pursuits exactly as we define them, right? And you do that by mutilating the organ that is most obviously associated with these sort of pursuits. And he writes in Philippians, "For we are the circumcision who worship by the Spirit of God and glory in Christ Jesus and put no confidence in the flesh." Okay, so to me that's very kind of great, clear statement of that. If I interpret it with knowing Girard, it makes so much sense and it makes nuanced sense. It's basically saying we forsake getting fooled and tripped up and destroyed by these pursuits that are chasing after the wind and that just lead to misery, and we're gonna cut that out of ourselves. Yeah.
And
but I was gonna let me give you the other one with the angels, and it goes a little bit to what you said about the game, right? This to me is curious. So again, St. Paul writes, "Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind. Now, the word sensuous here is sarkos. So sensuous just kind of means fleshly mind. So the question I have for you is, why would somebody with a sensuous or fleshly mind be into worship of angels, be talking about visions, and be into asceticism, which means what? Self-denial. Mm-hmm. You see the kind of contradiction here? You would think that worship of angels, asceticism, and doesn't say what kind of angels, right? But you would think that worship of this like esoteric obsessions and self-denial of the flesh, you would think that's the opposite of a fleshly mind. But here St. Paul identifies it with a fleshly mind. So people denying themselves and obsessing about angels. So there's a contradiction here, don't you think so?
Absolutely, and I'm actually very happy that you brought that up, because a question that we get asked a lot is by typically atheists who know nothing about the Bible. They'll say, "Well, why couldn't have Jesus have just come earlier, right? Like, if there was this fall of Adam, why couldn't Jesus have just immediately come right after?" And I'm not sure what the answer to this typically would be from like a theologian, but for me, the answer that's always sort of made sense was essentially that when Jesus was incarnate, he railed against the Pharisees, and he railed against the Pharisees because of their fleshly religiosity, right? And so, and I think Paul is making a point here, which is that even like a false religiosity can itself be like a fleshly pursuit. Sure. This is like one of the most well-veiled fleshly pursuits, because it's a fleshly pursuit veiled as a spiritual, pursuit. But yeah, I just think that it seems that Paul's kind of hitting at the same thing. And I think you kind of see that a little bit now in some charismatic circles. I saw a video just yesterday of Father Peter Heers being approached on the street by a Pentecostal guy, and the Pentecostal guy was just going on and on and on about how I've had visions, I've cast out demons, I've done all this stuff. Like, do you want me to pray over you? Do you want me to pray over you? And Father Peter Heers is like, no, get away from me. Like he said, you're full of pride, is what he told the guy, which is a pretty obviously a harsh thing to say to someone that they're full of pride. But I think it is kind of a lot of times lost on us that religiosity can very well be just an incredibly sophisticated form of this fleshly desire. And I think it relates to the metaphysical desire that Girard sort of lays out, just because yeah, I don't know if you want to kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think you're on point there. I mean, the history world is riddled with these fleshly. So let's say we can associate with egotism, right? People that are basically power hungry or just self-centered, who are trying to use that as a power move. I mean, that's been a thing since time immemorial with sorcery and magic and so on, trying to use these divine these not divine, but these spiritual forces, dark ones, to pursue your earthly ends. Mm-hmm. I would add to that, though, that atheism itself has equivalent things, right? So I talk about how you talk to atheist materialists, they're gonna act like happy Epicureans, right? They want to enjoy science, live in their garden, enjoy the here and now, and just make the best of the present moment, while the rest of us who are thinking about the afterlife maybe are, missing out on all the fun. But again, Girard really, to me personally, is the one who made me see that, again, once you see people pursuing their pleasure, it always ends up being not very pleasant. But not just that, if you look at the theorizing of new atheists, so new atheists, okay, enjoy the moment right now. Can you do that? They can't do that. Because look at the theories of new atheists, social Darwinists. They're pretty morose, right? They're pretty, let's say, black-pilled. I mean, what are you going to hope for? Heat death of the universe, right? Social Darwinism. So you got these kind of really dark theories of there's nothing out there and we're all doomed and death is the final say. And then combine that with the supposedly happy, cheerful things like, hey, just enjoy the moment. And it's really not congruent. It really doesn't match, right? Like, how are we supposed to be happy if nothing makes sense in the end? So,
Right.
again, right, the fleshly minds, even if you strictly try to be an atheist and you're fleshly in that sense, you're still going to end up morose, because atheism is essentially morose, right? It's a belief in nothing.
Yeah, and I know you're not super familiar with Kierkegaard necessarily, but in his Either Or, he sets up essentially this sort of I don't even want to call it a dialectic. It really is a binary between this. He calls it the aesthetic, but it is essentially this flesh, this metaphysical desire, sort of a thing.
Sure.
And it's in a sense, it's sort of it's a worldview, right? The flesh is a worldview. The pursuit of metaphysical desire is a worldview. The aesthetic worldview is a worldview, and it's essentially a worldview that has enjoyment of life as its final aim, right? And it doesn't. It maybe it has some awareness of quote unquote metaphysical things or an afterlife or something like this, but it essentially sort of breaks down into a sort of polytheism, where you just have an assortment of gods that are just swirling around, and they're, at any one given time you have one that is sort of your main idol, and that's what you're after. But so one thing here is the escalation of desire and creation of idols. What do you have to say on that topic specifically?
Yeah, so I touched on it before. Escalation of desire. So when I was talking about the fetish, right, we can go to, I don't know if there's kind of difference, obviously, now in archaic times, and historically there's been a difference. And you talked about it too, how, right now when we talk about escalation of desire and creation of idols, we're talking about this metaphysical desire, usually kind of the leisure class. 19th century novel is a great sort of setting for that, and it addressed that a lot. Whether you're talking about Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, Proust, Stendhal, all these big names, or most of these big names in 19th century kind of high literature, are talking about essentially the same type of people and the same type of problem, right? You always have these 19th century Europeans. You have the leisure class, so they're not really working or struggling, and they are free to pursue their desires. Whether it's kind of libertinism, what they call, which is kind of chasing after women, or it could be intellectual pursuits and so on. But what happens is they end up obsessing over it. And Girard writes somewhere, because Girard was a very good literary critic, read all these books, right? And he notes how in all these books, when these writers end up talking about describing desire, like extreme sexual desire, they cannot but use religious terms. Right? I worship this woman. This woman is an angel. I felt an angelic presence. So to these writers, they're not understanding the importance or the significance of the fact that they're using this language. They would just say, oh, we're just being metaphorical. We're not really religious. We're just using metaphors. But it betrays the process. It betrays the process of going from just desiring something to worshiping it. And maybe in the archaic times, they did it differently, right? They would have a ritual where they would dance around this mysterious being that, the demon / God who causes all the trouble, but also delivers them from it. And then they kind of transfer all their frustrations and desires onto this God. And this God or fetish or demon becomes literally what they worship, and they pray to it and so on. And it could be literally demonic. But in both cases, there's that bridge. Modern man doesn't appreciate it, right? We materialists or secular people today, we don't appreciate it. But in the old times, that was very, I think, more in people's minds. It was lost in the 19th century, but to maybe ancient Romans or Greeks or someone like that, and to St. Paul, right, who says that covetousness is idolatry, that bridge between passions and idols was more clear. And even to pagans, it was more clear. They kind of knew that, you know, their passions, they idolized their passions, right? And but the thing is, they were cool with it in some sense.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that you had just mentioned, so Paul talks about covetousness, obviously. I can't remember which book from Rene Girard he mentions this, and I'm sure you are going to immediately know what I'm talking about. But so Girard actually talks about how the 10 Commandments are set up so that they sort of, so for people who don't know, this whole thing with mimetic desire, essentially when people are imitating one another's desires, and we talked about this before in this podcast, there's always this escalation, right? It goes from just coveting one thing to coveting a man's entire being to you get swept up into this mimetic rivalry. There's always an escalation, right? And it usually ends in violence. But so I just now was reminded as you were talking about this. So Paul sort of roots this flesh nature. He sort of roots it in covetousness. And Rene Girard kind of points out that the 10 Commandments are sort of set up as prohibitions against the results of this covetousness, this mimetic desire, and they're set up in a reverse order so that they prevent. They're set up in a reverse order so that they can prevent the final. So I'll kind of wait. 10 Commandments in order. I'm trying to find it right now.
Yeah, here it is. I have them simplified version.
Sweet.
He starts the reverse order from commandment number 6. And I think a lot of theologians separate them into 5 and 5. I forgot exactly what the basis is. Once have a promise or something like that. But the last 5, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not testify or bear false witness against your neighbor. And then the 10th one is thou shalt not covet, right? But the extended version of the 10th one is something like thou shalt not covet your neighbor's cow and your wife or anything else, right, that belongs to your neighbor. So, and this gets made fun of by critics, right, saying, oh, you can steal a neighbor's cow, but it's okay. You can't steal his cow, but you can't steal his money, right? So Girard says how, in some sense, it was a stylistic choice of this commandment, kind of saying, don't covet this or that in your neighbor. And then the person just realized, look, anything else, don't covet anything belonging to your neighbor. And to Girard, this commandment 10 is like a capstone, crowning achievement. And he says it because it sort of justifies or supports his mimetic theory. Because, of course, Girard says that all this trouble happens because we covet each other's stuff. So, yes, there's a reverse order. He's saying, like, the writer was writing down the list of things you can't do. Don't murder, no adultery, no stealing. But then at the end, he realizes, you know what? All this stuff happens because we covet each other's stuff. So then it says, like, look, just don't covet anything. Or another way to think of it is kind of in the order of urgency. Like, first we got to stop the Band-Aid, right? Don't murder, no adultery, no stealing. But then you kind of think about it, and it's like, okay, what's at the root of all this? Mimetic desire, right?
Yeah.
So
you put it so much more beautifully than I was about to put it. So I appreciate you stepping in, because
I just read it like 10 times.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's like, it really is a beautiful encapsulation of what Girard kind of is able to elucidate with the text. Because I think a lot of people look at these texts, a lot of like atheists or people, and they kind of laugh at them, and they're like, Paul's talking about the flesh and he's talking about all this, and talking about a donkey. But it's like, so at the risk of going off topic, I kind of want to talk about our personal experience with Girard. Like, I don't know if you have any specific examples from your own life about maybe realizations that you came to about your own pursuits and stuff like that. But for me, Girard came at a point in my life where I was not very religious. I was somewhat religious. I was about as religious as the culture around me was. But Girard, I think, has a way of articulating the wisdom that is to be found in the scriptures in a way that does appeal to someone who, like you said, is sort of coming at them from a rational perspective. And so I don't know if, like, in your own personal life, like whenever you read Girard, if it kind of caused any sort of reorientations or anything like that.
Absolutely. I think this is a common thing about Girard. Peter Thiel, who probably I heard of Girard through Peter Thiel, but he says, and Peter Thiel really isn't that Christian or religious, if we're going to probably be honest about it, but he says that the strong appeal of Girard to Peter Thiel was that it made him realize that the religion of his parents, which he used to, not respect, it made him respect it and realize, like, okay, this thing is more serious than it looks. And I think that's a common finding on people's journey in the Bible, right? And but I want to really, I think it's we can really tie it into the earlier point you made about why didn't Jesus come earlier? Remember that? Mm-hmm. So there's this idea that humanity's fallen, and then you go back early on, and just humanity's so ridden with pride and violence and the flesh that they cannot receive messages, and basically the more kind of deprived humanity is, the less able they are to be kind of reasoned with, or we are. The more we are kind of steeped into the flesh, the less able we are to be reasoned with rationally. That's why early on you couldn't have Jesus. You have to have 10 commandments, and you have to have a violent God of the New Testament, Old Testament, because people were violent. Yeah, quote unquote, because people were violent, and there's just. Right. So, like, in a sense, I mean, I'm being simplistic about it, but you can think of it as a teacher and a student. And when the student is just a horrible student misbehaving, you can't be teaching them trigonometry. You got to kind of set the rules.
Right.
Later on in the fullness of time, these rules become more and more rationalized. And Christ was a giant fulfillment of the law that kind of gave the showed us that the law is the basis of the law is love, right? Love. It's all about love. And now that we come into a more rational age where we have science, social science, anthropology, it makes sense to me that somebody, René Girard, but many others, many other defenders of the faith, right, and Christian apologists of modern times, they are giving us more and more rational interpretations of the Bible, simply because of the fullness of time, right? The thing is blossoming and getting better. And I think a Catholic theologian, what's his name? Moore, Sir Thomas More, I think he was famous for this. I haven't read him, I'm not sure. But there's this idea as that time progresses and our faith develops, we do become more and more rational. So we don't have to accept everything just on this is how it is, right? Fist down, but we can actually be given the grace of logical appreciation.
And Girard phrases it in a very interesting way. It's something that stuck with me. He says that God, because people always point to God in the Old Testament and say, how can this mean, angry, violent God be the same God as Jesus, right? But it's like you said, and Girard puts it in a good way. He says that God is essentially opening up a methadone clinic for humanity, like with regard to violence, right? Yeah, right? Because the law is essentially saying just good. And it's Girard's words, not mine, but he essentially is like, okay, we gotta put the Band-Aid on this and just stop you. Like, that's the law, right? The law is just like, just stop. Let's prohibit these behaviors. But then over time, as man becomes more sort of cultivated, we're able to get more at the heart of the issue, and more is revealed in time. But speaking of Peter Thiel, did you see that article about there's an article that came out recently that said that a lot of people in Silicon Valley are embracing Christianity in order to get closer to Peter Thiel? You see that? That's a real article.
That's a good thing.
It's kind of funny.
That's cool. I got to read that.
I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
but speaking of the flesh, so in my personal experience, so one of my first like video series on this YouTube channel was a vlogging series, and it was called Beyond the Flesh. So I actually
did not know that.
Yeah, that's what I called it. So essentially, like I named it that because, you know, when I got out of college, I had all of these huge aspirations, right? And I was like, you know, literally just like metaphysical desire par excellence, wanted to be just like have praise just like showered on me, right? And that like everything that I did, everything that I oriented my life toward was with that goal in mind. And it was after
same here, man. Same here.
Yeah. So for me, Gerard helped me to kind of see that a little bit, and I had named that series Beyond the Flesh because the series essentially is about me and my brother getting involved in the Houston punk rock scene, seeing these punk rock acts who were performing, and we thought they were really cool, and we essentially wanted to be like them. And we start our own band, and it's this journey of us trying to get to our first show and like prepare for it and be ready for it. But I named it Beyond the Flesh because for me there's a weird tension, because obviously to be like a punk rock person or like a performer, there is an egotism sort of built into the whole endeavor. And so for me, there was this sort of early commitment to trying to be aware of that egotism and sort of like put it on display and try to try to
like ironic egotism kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And so I mean, yeah, in a sense, it's kind of funny that we talk about the flesh today, because I wanted to mention that. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of ways that I was very much driven, and still to this day am driven by the flesh. Like we all are. It's a lifelong process of rooting out and finding these places where, because the thing about desire is it's always becoming more elusive. And so you yourself have to try to, root it out and seek it out and always sort of be reorienting. But yeah, I don't know, kind of where you want to go from there. But
it's very prescient of you that you named it the flesh. I mean, you probably had an intuition of the flesh, like everything we talked about. It was kind of the germ of it was somewhere in the back of your head. I would probably said like Beyond the Pride or something, but the fact that you named it the flesh kind of shows it's got this biblical, I guess, flair to it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, yeah, and that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun shooting that, because honestly, a lot of the things that were accomplished during the filming of that were things that had for a year prior been just purely vain pursuits. So at the very first episode of it, it's like us releasing a film with our friend. So we had like taken 2 weeks off. Everyone kind of like quit their jobs to help our friend put out this film. And so the first episode was us like debuting it to these people in Houston or whatever. And it was just it was I was sort of living in the wake of, or like reaping the fruit of the previous year's sort of, like, I guess you could say, vain pursuits, like for self what's the word, self exaltation. But I named it Beyond the Flesh because I was sort of trying to, like you said, kind of have an ironic twist toward it. And to be honest, it's so weird looking back on your previous work and like trying to make sense of it. I think any creator is never fully conscious.
A lot of like youth is just like vanity, I mean.
Oh yeah.
Like stuff I've I was really vain. It's just part of it. Hopefully, it's a growing up process. Some people never grow out of it, right? But
sure.
also our culture really fosters it.
Definitely.
And,
Definitely.
yeah, I mean, and yeah. And probably what I'm doing now, like 10 years later, I'm going to be like, yeah, I was kind of full of myself in a lot of ways. So like you say, it's a lifelong process. And part of it is just humility, right? You can't really get rid of it. I mean, sometimes the harder I try, I just kind of end up crashing.
For sure.
So
for sure. No, you're absolutely
not
correct.
to go into details.
And well, I think what's funny is you make such a good point, because I think about that all the time too, with regard to the stuff that I'm making. Like you said, like 10 years from now, you and I might look at this podcast and be like, wow, like listen to but it's funny how that kind of works. And I think with Beyond the Flesh and just with the channel in general, my goal has been to, because I would say for the longest time, I just avoided creating anything at all, because I had convinced myself, well, if I create anything at all, if I put out anything at all, 10 years from now, I'm going to feel like it was some vain pursuit. I'm going to feel like I was so, egotistic in doing so. And so I'm not going to do anything at all. But I think I think that too is a trap. Like, I think you can humble yourself by just going, you know what, if I make this podcast today, if I put out this video series today, 10 years from now, I'm probably going to think that I was a doofus, but I'm going to humble myself. I'm going to just do it anyway. Like, I'm not beyond looking like a doofus. That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you got to make these doofus podcasts or whatever content in order to get to the less doofus ones.
Right.
There's no shortcut. You can't skip the doofus stage.
Right.
And that's just how it is. And even the greatest artists tell you that. Or you look at like great artists' early stuff and you're like, man, that's hilarious, right? But you just have to go through it.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, at the risk of getting off topic, I think that was like some good stuff though. But essentially, all of this stuff. So for you, we talked about how our culture now kind of almost encourages people to remain in the flesh and remain sort of like almost discourages growing up, right? So for you, what are some more contemporary like manifestations of this sort of flesh nature?
It's like everywhere. I mean, we can pick any one of them. I think they're really united in this. I think, popular culture as a whole has been that. And, we all partake in it. I partake in it. I think about this, of course, and I think sometimes one of the kind of secrets of success of popular culture is it's always managed to present itself as a sort of a less serious culture, or as a sort of a break, So it would be something like, there's high culture, or there's a real life that where you work, where you go to your church, or whatever, listen to classical music, right? But then to take a break from the seriousness, you dabble a little bit in entertainment. So even though entertainment is very fleshy, it's kind of saying like, don't take us too seriously. It's just a movie. It's just music. It's just having fun. So I think all of it is the flesh. But what's happening, it's kind of like sucked people in where, we don't have the non-flesh part anymore. Now, like, entertainment is all of culture.
Right.
So you can pick it like whatever. Politics is obviously about the pursuit. Christian politics is supposed to be like this dirty business where you're just trying to manage the earthly kingdom, making sure things don't fall apart. But that's not supposed to be the end all be all of life. But once you make your politics this kind of power struggle, egotistic rivalry, that's the flesh, right? So the whole wokeism stuff and the whole politics, music obviously has always been about that. Now it's gotten very kind of overtly sexualized and violent. It just kind of gets worse and worse. And movies, they obviously promote the flesh. So I literally all of pop culture is that. And education, education has been totally secularized, and I don't have a solution, right? People want to. I never went to a Christian church. My parents didn't send me. I don't really feel like. I mean, there's some problems, but I don't really regret that. I don't have solutions necessarily, but I just feel like the flesh is all around us, and that's what's causing a lot of these problems, right? We somehow have to pull back.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on something pretty big, which is that, yeah, our entire culture really is built around entertainment and also sort of like, so, okay, I had a friend the other day, I was kind of talking to him, and I was just talking to him about, like, I said, what do you think happens after you die? Because he's one of these guys who's like really into Marvel movies, really into like all of this stuff, but anytime things get philosophical.
But that's another example, Marvel movies. As far as I don't interrupt, but that's a great example of materialists just dabbling in this esoteric stuff. It's like none of that is real. But yeah, anyways, please.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Continue.
And like there's like a literally it's like a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people spend all their freaking time learning about Superman's bench max, and it's like it's all meaningless. Like it's actually meaningless, but it's like I think the best way to put it is they take entertainment very seriously, and they're very reverent of entertainment. And I'm not beyond this. I'm not trying to be like I never succumb to it or anything like that. But I was walking with a friend the other day, and something I noticed is that I have certain friends that if you ever get philosophical, if you ever get theological with them, they pump the brakes fast because they're like they just don't want to get into that territory. And I think it's just because when you start getting into that territory, when you start talking theologically or philosophically, suddenly words have meaning, and like coming to conclusions about things means you have to actually, embody like those conclusions you're coming to in the real world. And I think there is with entertainment and just with the way we engage with it, I think there is a real attempt to not take anything seriously, to never really engage with one's, like, what's going on up here. And I think it's because Kierkegaard kind of talks about how the aesthetic man at times will sort of pretend like there's no choice to be had between the ethical and the aesthetic, which is, I call it postponement. It's this idea that, well, if I just avoid making the decision between what's ethical and what is aesthetic or what is pleasurable, then I forgo the consequences of that decision. But that's not, or I forgo the decision to begin with. That's not, you're not avoiding anything. Like you've just chosen to be, like you've just chosen the aesthetic path, right? You've just chosen the flesh by default. And so I was talking to this friend, and I said, what do you think happens like after you die? Just curious, like not putting forth my own interpretation for him or anything. And he said, I just don't really think about those things, which is mind-boggling to me, because I'm like, what? I mean, like, what? I mean, truthfully, like, if you're a man, like if you're a man over the age of 18, and you don't actually think about, like,
I don't think that's an honest answer.
No, I don't think it is an honest answer. I really don't think it is.
But I mean, there's judgment, or kind of the distinguishing, judging, differentiating is really out of fashion now. So people almost take like a moral exemption card or something to it.
Yeah, it's like a relativism.
I don't want to be judgmental. Yeah, but it's like entertainment. You're kind of removing the stakes, right? You're playing for pretend money, right? And you're saying like, I can't lose, but you can't win either, right? So at the end, you're just gonna end up with nothing, right? You've been playing with play money all the time. That's not real stuff. So,
for sure,
that's a very good point, and that is entertainment. Entertainment facilitates that big time, right?
Do you think that there's anything within Girard, or do you think there's anything within Paul's sort of articulation of this flesh, like flesh nature? I don't even know if calling it nature is the right terminology here, but do you think there's anything within that kind of elucidates why people, like why our culture at large is sort of like that today, or why things have been heading in that direction? Do you think there's anything there, or do you think? Because no doubt it's just a bunch of
think
idols.
Right. So I don't have anything that explicitly mentions distraction or entertainment. I feel like these words started popping up in philosophical circles later on, 19th century, when Pascal, even earlier, was saying how people pursue. Girard mentions this. Pascal was 1600s. He was kind of saying that people. He was talking at that exact point, a little bit different wording, but saying how people pursue divertissement, which means entertainment or whatever, just so they don't think about the big questions. Maybe in St. Paul's time that wasn't a thing, but what I trace it back when I think about our culture, and how it's avoiding all those questions. The only thing I trace it back is to the violent sacred. I talked about this before, right? So it's in a way it can be traced to Christianity, because Christianity got rid of the violent sacred, the idea that God is violent. And, before, people are kind of accepting of the fact that a God will cause a plague and mess things up and require blood, right? And, or you can use a divine agency to throw a curse to win a war and so on, right? But Christianity over the centuries undermined the violent sacred. And what has that developed among us is this big aversion to a judgmental God, right? So that's where we get to this idea is like everything's going to be nice and dandy. I don't want to think about it. So people are just really peevish about judgment. And
it's like a universalism.
And I think it's a misunderstanding of love, right? Like there's got to be judgment and love, and things have to be real. But people have just swerved in this other direction where like just thinking about the idea of God or afterlife sounds a little violent, a little too fire and brimstone. And that's the one thing I would connect it to, if anything.
For sure. And I had a friend the other day who actually asked me, he said, do you really think that, God, like if he's all loving, do you really think that an all loving God could send people to hell, or that he would even have hell prepared for people? And essentially, like what I kind of told him was just that, it's like there are things that we can do that can certainly sever our union or can put us further away. And also, I don't know if it would be entirely loving to allow, evil to like go unpunished. Never to place myself in that judgment seat. But I'm just saying that that does seem to be a prevailing sentiment nowadays. Sort of that there's no metaphysical consequence for anything, and that we just kind of fade away. Like I think this relates to the flesh, because there's this sense that. So I wrote a novel a little while back, never published it, but in the novel, the characters are essentially sort of almost obsessed with this idea that like nothing is ever of any record. Like everything is eventually just going to be forgotten. There's no real witness to anything that occurs. And the book is about mine and my friend's time as right-wing bodybuilders who are all into that whole hype. We've talked about that on a previous podcast, because that is an ideology that's super, super vain. And it is very much about egotism, and it literally is about the flesh, like literally about the flesh, making your body as beautiful as possible. Yeah, the body. And but yeah, there's this obsession of almost hoping that everything is eventually obscured and forgotten, and there's this hope that there's no real consequence for anything, and that, well, which doesn't it say at the very beginning of John? It says that essentially that darkness hates the light. Darkness does not want, darkness does not want to have its deeds
to be seen.
Yeah, to be seen.
Right.
Yeah.
Revealed.
Right. And so, to me, I feel like in some way that is sort of that I think that somewhat relates to the flesh, because it seems like desire is something that is always trying to hide itself and not be seen, and also the flesh nature is something that is always trying to hide itself in ever more sophisticated manifestations, right? Like, so even in the case of the Pharisees or the super religious, right? Or I don't want to say super religious, but people who disguise or their flesh desire is disguised as religiosity. It's like it's always trying to hide itself. It's always trying to escape undetected.
Reality, yeah. It's basically lies. It lives off of lies. I mean, so does any pursuit. I mean, if you're trying to exploit people one way or another, you got to lie to them, right? And then everything just becomes darkness or a lie. So, all right, is this a good way to end it?
Yeah. So I'll if you want to just go ahead and give your closing thoughts on the topic.
No, I thought we had a great conversation. I would say, in summary, the big take from me here is that we got to think of the flesh, whether we're talking about the ancient kind of interpretation or the modern interpretation of pursuit of distractions and so on. It's a big mistake to think of it as utility maximizing, fun having, right? Because it's not that. And I think Girard shows it, and then you go back to the Bible and you see that Bible is also aware of that. So that's a big thing we need to think about, right? It's not about fun and games. It ends up making you miserable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, George, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Guys, please subscribe. Go check out George Boreas. Go search him up.
Boreas podcast, BoreasSubstack.com. George Boreas, look it up, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, guys, this has been the Park Score Podcast. Thank you.